Hello everyone, welcome. Chad Martin with Data Prep U here. Welcome to our live stream of this week's Alteryx Weekly Challenge. Now, this week's Weekly Challenge is a little bit different than the last several weeks. The last several weeks have been all revolving around kind of some more beginner level preparation and blending. This one actually incorporates some geospatial work from what I can tell based on the description. Now, as a reminder to everyone, at this point in time, the only thing that I have done so far is actually read through the description. That is it. I have not actually downloaded any of the materials. I have not pre-solved this challenge. In fact, it was only posted not too long, 2 hours ago anyway, and I've just gotten to my computer. So at this point, what we're going to do is hop right over into the screen share. We're going to read through this, download it, and start cranking through and working through the actual problem. If you are online, I highly recommend that you ask questions or provide feedback as well, because, you know, as always, we want this to be collaborative. And the ultimate goal here is so you can actually see and hear how I think and how I kind of work through a problem and try to figure out how to solve this particular problem. So with that said, let's go ahead and shrink myself down just a little bit over into the corner and read through challenge number 294. Today is Monday, November 15th, 2021, and today's challenge states, how much do you know about Formula One circuits around the world? In this challenge, we will go on a trip around the continents, going all the way around the continents. The dataset input circuits contains the information about Formula One. I'm going to go ahead and highlight my mouse here also while I'm kind of working through this. But the dataset input circuits contains information about the Formula One circuits in the world, including its location data. The text input tool lists countries with their continents. Using the dataset and the information from the text input tool, find the circuit at the highest altitude for each continent and create a map to view the circuits with their names. Now, we're going to get into a couple of different things here. I can already tell. One is, yes, going to be any sort of the geospatial stuff, but we may even have some opportunity to get into some reporting tools here. So I'm going to go ahead and download the challenge. If you're following along, please welcome to do so as well. So once we've downloaded this, let's go ahead and open up this challenge. This is an Alteryx package, so let's go ahead and import that package. I'm going to say yes, successful load. And then for those of you who have been following along with this, you know that the first thing that I do is run the workflow. So let's go ahead and run this workflow so we can see what our inputs look like and what our outputs look like. So here we've got what looks like a comma separated list over here. So here we got Albert Park, Grand Prix Circuit, Melbourne. I'm going to double click on this to see the underlying data. So yes, this is, it looks like there's an ID in here. This is a comma separated list. There's text qualifiers. Text qualifiers are quotes around your text. And that's helpful. So if you have like commas within your actual data and you don't want those to be treated as delimiters, they will have a text qualifier or a quote around those. So we've got a lot of good info in here. So my guess is what we want to do is actually take this info and then populate it over into the null values over here, because I can see lat, lon, alt, URL, and so forth. Now I might have a couple of ideas of how we make that a little bit more dynamic. But then I want to see that we've got, okay, so the country and then the continent that it is associated with. Now our output looks like we've got the continent, the country, and then the latitude and longitude. So these are the ones with the highest altitude. And then the second piece of things is actually creating some sort of a map. Now in this case, they did not use, or they actually did use a map report. So we are going to in fact use the map report tools in this. So what we're doing though is we actually see this full world map where we have, they actually have little flags on this with the labels. So we're going to get into that reporting tool too. But first things first, let's go ahead and populate this circuit ref name, location, country, lat, lon, alt, and URL. Now I'm going to do a couple of things here. First, let's move my outputs over. I want to get these kind of out of the way a little bit. I will reference these, but the first thing I want to do is go through and actually split things out. So I'm going to use actually two different select tools here. And you may think this seems kind of weird, but I'm going to use two different select tools. The first one is actually going to remove all remaining fields, options, select, deselect, highlighted fields, and even the unknown category. I'm going to remove that. But then I'm going to do the exact opposite in this second select, and I'm only going to remove the circuit ID. The reason why is because if I were to go in and use a text to columns directly after my very first one, so text to columns here, and then say, yes, we have the circuit ID. We're only going to use that one single comma here. The number of columns, I think it's a pretty safe bet that we will actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns in here. So we can probably safely assume that there's 8. And we do want to ignore delimiters in quotes just in case. Now, this is a little bit of an advanced option. This is where we have those, what they call the text qualifiers. Quotes are text qualifiers. So Control R, I'm going to run my workflow here, where we now have this nice little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it looks like 8 might have a little bit extra in here. So what happens if we split this out to 9? Ah, look at that. So that 8 is actually our altitude. So I might have miscalculated a little bit in here, which is okay because we have the altitude, the URL. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to actually go into my favorites now and the union tool. Well, actually a few things. One, let's use a select tool. I'm going to remove my circuit ID because we have the exact number of fields here in position. But I'm going to actually use a union tool here to say this number 1 is our first reference. Okay. Now in this particular case, I'm also going to go through, I'm going to do a little bit of a trick here, and I'm going to use a formula tool after this, or excuse me, a filter tool. And this filter tool, I'm going to go into a custom filter because I don't want a bunch of null rows in here. So I want to get all of these out of here. Now I could say, yes, circuit ref does not equal 1 or does not equal null or something like that. But just in case there was a random value in here, I don't want that to be included. So if you want to force and always force there to be 0 records passing through, I'm going to say 1 equals 0. Since 1 equals 0 never, ever, ever will happen, we will always have 0 records coming out of the true side. But the key here is we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we do have 8 things in here. We will actually have, though, the correct values or the correct fields in the correct position. So now let's take a look at what's going on here because we've got something wrong. So as we're looking at this true, it looks like the very first thing is that reference and then the name. So here we have the reference, the name. Oh, you know what? There's 2 different names in here. So name, location, country. So if I'm looking at name, location, country right here. So name, location, country, lat lon, and then, oh, you know what? There is that. No, that's actually something. What's going on here? Something's different. All right, let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and just add this in. So what we're doing though is I'm going to say very specifically set a specific output order. And instead of auto-config by name, we're going to do auto-config by position. Now this is the key here. Now the problem here is we are going to potentially have something of an issue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That number 9, that's going to be, for some reason, again, something is not quite right because the name and the location are going to be a little bit different. So that location and the country, it's telling me right now, actually, that's actually going to be the city. That's the problem. So the location and the name. So we probably need to remove the, oh, that's Albert Park Grand Prix Circuit. Let's take a look at this. What does this look like? Circuit name Adelaide Street Circuit. But whenever we come into here, and if we see some of the things around the world, where's the Adelaide Street Circuit? That's what I want to try to find. I want to try to find my same reference that we have in here. All right, so doing a quick little look. I could do a quick little sort. So let's do a quick sort here, ascending. And Adelaide, so it is called Adelaide Street Circuit. So you know what? That name, we may not actually even need that name out of the top piece here because we have the Adelaide Street Circuit. If we go back into here, we would also have Fuji Speedway for the circuit name. So let's take a look at that as well. So once again, sort. Again, I'm just doing a little bit of discovery here, trying to figure this out. So here we've got the actual EF Fuji Speedway right here. Yes, so this does not seem to be actually relevant at this point. I even see Dallas, so Fair Park, Detroit Street Circuit. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take out that number 1 here. Now, let's check this out. Because we are auto-configuring by position, it is critical that we're saying set specific output order because our metadata that we have pushing through right here now should nicely match up at our output. So there's like the reference. Oh, I'm sorry. I may have even messed that one up. because maybe it's not that number 1, it was the number 2 that we didn't want through. So now we have that reference. We've got a name, location, country, latitude, longitude, altitude, and that URL. Now I want to double check and see if there is an actual reference or anything like that here. So continent, country. So this does actually include the city. So I guess where I'm starting to get flubbed up here is to where they're referencing that name here. So that's clearly going to be the name of the place. The location, that does appear to be that city, country, latitude, longitude, and so forth. So let's do a little bit of a data cleanse out of this and clean up some of those quotes. So I want to actually remove, it doesn't look like we have any other punctuation, although we do have some Unicode values in here. So you know what? Let's remove that. I'm going to go back to a formula, and we're going to actually go in. Actually, let's do a multi-field formula in this. So multi-field formula, I'm going to say select text fields. Let's just do name, location, and country. So clear that. Name, location, and country. And then we're actually going to do a trim. And then we're going to do, out of whatever current field there is, we're going to do, let's trim a quote, comma, nothing. So our end result should be a much cleaner, although now for some reason out of this, oh, you know what? Because I don't want to do a copy and new. I always make that mistake. Here we go. So now the end of this, we're not doing a copy output fields. Out of the current fields that we have in here, we should be trimming the text values out of this. For some reason, that's still not giving me exactly what I want. Not totally sure why that's doing this, but let's just do a replace. Oh, you know what? Because in the trim, you don't actually need to say what the destination side of things is. All you have to do is reference that quote there. So regardless, what we've done is we've just taken out those values. We've taken out that information or taken out those quotes. So now we have that name. There's that specific reference, the name of the place, the location of the place, which does appear to be those cities that we have. So we can probably rename that location into city if we like. Of course, latitude, longitude, altitude, and URL. So here we go. Now that final piece of here is relatively straightforward in that we want to look at just whatever that highest altitude is for each continent. So now it's going to be relatively simple. Let's just do a sort here. And what I'm going to do is sort on that altitude descending. I do want to make sure that metadata here, altitude is not set up properly. So let's add in, again, we're going to back up a little bit. We're just continuously kind of doing a couple of additional things here. So latitude, longitude, and altitude. Let's go ahead and make those data types. Let's change those into, let's just say a double for now. So now altitude descending should actually give us all of those altitudes in a descending manner. And then finally, let's do a little sample here. We're going to say first one row, but we're going to group on that continent. So location, although, you know, we haven't done that. We haven't actually matched this up to the continent. So now we should have that country and the continent. So instead of doing that first one, we do need to do a little bit of a join first. So let's do our replacement here where we've got that. Let's do a country to the right side. We want to do a country. And now that we've got that country set up here, we can remove that right country. We do have a continent, so let's go ahead and move that up as well. One more rerun. Do we have any unjoined records? Nope. So joined records, we should have the name of the place, the location, which is actually that city. So I'm going to change that location over here to city. I do like all caps, so I'm going to actually, or title case for something like this. So now we have the name, city, country, continent. Perfect. Okay, now let's go ahead and break that data stream, move this join over, and what do we got here? We're going to say altitude descending, but then we're going to say the first one based on that continent. And then we'll do one final thing here, but let's do, what do we got here? So we've got Fuji, there's the Adelaide. How is this actually sorted? It is sorted. It does appear that the what do we have this sort of? Is it sort of based on that altitude? Ascending is what this looks like. So it's first is doing the highest altitude, but now we want to actually do the based on that ascending order. Continent, country, city, circuit name. So let's also change that name to circuit name. And then finally at the end, let's just do one more select out of here. We'll do one more sort and then one more select. So what do we want again? Continent, country, city, circuit name. I'm going to go ahead and pop this thing out just to give myself a little bit more of a success rate in visualizing what I actually need. All right, so let's pin this to the top. Now in my select tool, I can very specifically say, all right, let's do the continent first. So we're going to move that. I'm right clicking and holding and dragging, by the way, right clicking and holding, dragging to move these around. You can move things around a number of different ways, but we have the continent and then there's the country after that. Then we're going to do the city after that. Then the circuit name after that. Of course, latitude and longitude after that. And then the altitude after that. And then unchecking URL and circuit reference. But let's go ahead and update these as well. Latitude, longitude, and altitude. Quick little run. How are we looking here? Great. Let's do one final sort on that altitude ascending to see if we get the same thing. So Australia, Asia, Europe, South America, Africa, North America, Australia, Japan, France, Brazil, South America, and Mexico. Let's just, this is what I'm referencing right here. Then we have Adelaide, Oyama, Claremont, Ferrand, Rio, Madrid, Midrand, and Mexico City. And then finally the street circuit, Fuji Speedway. Yep, everything's looking pretty good right now. All right. So we have our values. The last thing is we need to actually map this some way. All right. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and save this. So don't forget, Control S, save early, save often. This will quite literally save you. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to pop this little guy out into a new window just so I have a reference once again. It's in my other screen, so bear with me just one moment. Now, excuse me. Now what we got to do is create this world map. Now we can do this a number of different ways, but it's relatively straightforward whenever we actually use the map tool within the reporting category. So we get to use the reporting tools a little bit more and more. So I'm going to use the map tool here and I'm going to feed in all of our data. So we have two different things. One, we're going to have one of our results on a browse tool after this. So I'm going to say, let's call this, I'm going to annotate that particular browse, and I'm going to say that the annotation here is actually going to be question number 1. Save. Excellent. All right, now question number 2. Curious, how many of you know how to use the reporting tools? Probably not many. Honestly, the only reason I do is because I've had a lot of background, a lot of experience in creating static reports, bursting these reports to tens or hundreds or thousands of people based on specific metrics or specific requirements in that data. Now this one is going to be relatively straightforward because the incoming data shows us that we've got the actual circuit name. The only things we really need are circuit name, latitude, longitude, and that's pretty much it. We don't have a key. We don't have really anything else except for just that name, latitude, and longitude. So let's do this. Within the map itself, let's go into those settings of the report map. And what's going to happen is first we're going to get a base map. Now I like to use this reference base map of Alteryx Lite. If you've used Tableau before, it's kind of similar to that. I am a big fan of this because it gives you a lot of detail, but still allows you to see your points. So the scale, what did they use for the scale? They are using miles in this particular case. The resolution we'll leave low for now, and we're not going to do a drop shadow in this. But let's go ahead and go to the data. So the way this works is it's going to say, okay, well, where is your data? And this does require that you have a spatial object. Now you might be wondering, well, what the heck is a spatial object? Well, there's a spatial category in here that allows you to do a number of different things. So if you're trying to do distance analysis, drive time analysis, or anything of the sort, mapping, plotting points, visualizing virtually anything in some sort of a static report that you can, again, burst among hundreds or thousands of people. What we're going to do is something relatively straightforward. Is before that map tool, I'm going to actually drop in a create points tool, which looks for fields, latitude and longitude, and creates a spatial object. Now, for those of you who have not yet used geospatial before, a spatial object is required to do any sort of real distance calculation, even underneath the hood. If you were to, let's say, put an address into Google Maps, what happens is that Google Maps geocodes your address and makes a point, turns that text address into a point. This is taking the numbers of a latitude and longitude and actually creating points around those. So at the very base of this, if we were to drop down a browse tool and then once again Control R to run my workflow here, what's going to happen is this will actually display that spatial object on a map. Great, now we have these items on a map, but I need this to be an actual data point. We need to use the actual map tool itself. As a reminder, if you have any sort of geospatial objects or reporting objects, a quick way to visualize those in the designer is a browse tool. All right, so now we have our map. Looking at our data, here's the number one item. We're not going to do any sort of grouping. We're not even going to do any sort of thematic field. So theming is like, we want to create a different color based off of values. So creating more of like a heat map. That's known as a thematic map. But we do want a label. And in this case, we want the actual circuit name as our label. Now, under layers, this is the key. We've identified our data. Now we need to say, well, now that we know what that data is, where does it go? What does it do? So the next thing we want to do is go into layers. We need to actually add this points layer. And we are actually going to name this, honestly, we could just say, call this circuits or something like that. But we also, in expanding this out, get the opportunity to then change things. So if we want to actually have a legend or zooming into those layers, zoom into layer is going to be kind of irrelevant because we're looking at the different points on every single continent, almost every continent. There's not an F1 Speedway in Antarctica yet. I expect there to be one hopefully sometime in my lifetime. But now what we're going to do is go through and go into the different styles. So this gets into that more art side of things where we're actually trying to change the styling, the labeling, and so forth. So in this case, the style, there's a point style here that allows you to choose multiple different items in here. So a tent, star, plus, cross, house, hexagon, arrow down, arrow up, left, right, flag. So it looks like they used a flag in this. Under that label, this is going to be, again, a little bit of a difference here. So we have a background color, shadow. There should also be font size itself. So if you want to change anything, you can change anything from those defaults right here. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is just right-click, add browse after. Now that I've got my little flag set up, I've got my browse after, and I want to see, okay, my font looks a little bit different, but I do have these flags. So let's go ahead and go back into our map tool, back into our layers. Let's open this up for style. So we've got the flag. Let's look at that color of the flag and the size. I'm going to actually reduce, well, actually the size might have been fine, but instead of blue, clearly they're using a very bright red out of this. So we're going to do that. Now that label is going to be a little bit of a difference as well. So that color, we're not going to do green. It looks like they had a little bit of a darker blue out of this. So I'm going to just choose, sure, that one looks, well, actually, maybe it's a little bit brighter like that. So we'll do a little bit of a brighter blue here, but let's look at that font as well. We're not going to do a bold. I don't know that I necessarily want Arial. It's a little hard to see. So let's expand this out just a little bit. And I don't know what else could we be doing? Let's just find something kind of fun and kind of random here. Again, rerun. Let's do a little bit of a check. We may need to want to reduce that font size a little bit. For some reason, it does look a little bolded, probably just because the overall size in general. So what we're going to do is actually lower that. I'm going to take, once again, that layer, look at that circuit, look at the label. Instead of even that, let's just go back to that. I think we had, Arial in here, but let's take a look at that font size. I'm going to drop that down to like an 8 and let's see what happens there. Now, I'm not really sure what some of these other things are, like force, just to see. I'm going to play around a little bit to see what we end up with. Now we have that font size is going down. Let's change that force one more time, and then we'll kind of call it a day, I think. So I'm going to uncheck that, leave it just as the color, font size. Again, I don't believe we want any of that bold. It does seem to oddly be highlighted or not highlighted, but let's see if this changes anything. I'm going to just change that up. Okay, so that's actually worse. Let's go back one more time. Layers, label. Let's drop that down to 6, and I'm going to change that. See if that changes anything up. I think I actually just made it bold or made it worse. Yeah, I made that worse. So there's probably, honestly, it's just a font thing here that you'd have to play around with. The key here though, let's go ahead and remove that bolding out of this. And so then doing a click off and click back on now looks pretty straightforward. You know, at this point, I'm not really that concerned because there are going to be differences. There are going to be artistic differences for every single person in here. The key, though, is that we've actually got a map with all of our flagged locations that are showing up properly. If I look at my browse tool, we want to zoom in. It's not an interactive map. Again, this is a static map. But now we've actually got all of our info set up. We can actually maybe not read it as much, but again, just changing around or playing with those sizes a little bit is probably going to help with that. It probably would help to also change that map size. So even like changing this up to maybe like 12 instead might help things out. The key here though is creating a map is actually relatively straightforward, but there are a couple of different things to keep in mind as you do this, right? So there is a little bit of an art to it, but there is a lot of potential when it comes to grouping and bursting. All right, everyone. That's my time. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you did stick around to the end here, this was a really fun challenge, I think. So thanks to the folks at Alteryx for putting this together. But we will see you next week for challenge number 295. Next week is the Thanksgiving week, whereas I don't know if Alteryx is still going to have a challenge that week, but I assume so because, you know, we're still in business on Monday here at Data Prep U. But if we do, as long as there's a challenge to be had, you will see me solve this. All right, everyone. Thanks again so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful rest of your week.